these debilitating excesses, which have the world in a vice grip. I call it enchanted agnosticism. Enchanted agnosticism is a spiritual philosophy that derives from one central experience: existential faith or trust, or what I have called elsewhere, faith in the inscrutable. You have to have faith in the inscrutable in events like this. We're finding out a lot about this concept at this very moment. What does faith in the inscrutable involve? Well, let me propose the following. Behind every bounded faith resides an evolving, indefinite faith. Beyond every bounded God resides an expanding, indecipherable God. Tillich calls this the God beyond God, or the marvel and mystery of creation. The marvel and mystery of creation are beyond every truth, belief, and measure. They are beyond every beyond. Behind every monocular view is the question, but what's beyond that? An essential question. Whenever we are spiritually caught, whenever we specify, identify, or classify, we are caught short. The inscrutable cannot be specified. It must be lived with, reveled in, and suffered from, as we're doing this very moment. Trying against the forces. Captivating as they may be, gods and goddesses, idols and obsessions, fixations and icons are but pale stand-ins, substitutes and buffers for the inscrutable. Substitutes and buffers for the inscrutable. Even the absolute, Atman, or the void, to the degree they are decipherable, are but veneers. To be sure, veneers may be all we have. They evoke the sublime, suggests Burke in his wonderful study of the sublime in the 1700s. They are vehicles, carriers, fragments of the divine, suggests Tillich. Something is holy to everyone, even to those who deny the holy, Tillich states. But what is key for these thinkers is that pieces of the holy must not be confused with the holy itself, which is inscrutable. Whereas definable gods, such as those in the Old Testaments, the Old and New Testaments, ancient myth, popular culture, polarize us, either containing and belittling us on the one hand, or inflating and exaggerating us on the other. The inscrutable fosters neither. That which the inscrutable does foster is wholeness. Not Puritan or absolute wholeness, but by dynamic, paradoxical wholeness. The inscrutable evokes our humility and our possibility at the same time. But instead of dictating these conditions from on high, it inspires us to negotiate them and find our way within them. The result of this understanding is that devotees of the inscrutable are more inclined to see through their investments. They're less driven by them. They're less entrapped, either by false hope or false despair. And they are enlivened by the poignancy to life, an overview that heightens each attendant moment. The way to the inscrutable is through struggle. Struggle jolts the system, dents the armor. But struggle is only the beginning. The shock and awakening are only preparatory. The next crucial question is how and whether one pursues, engages with, and emerges from one's struggle. How does one end up following one's struggle? To the degree one is able to emerge from the struggle, one can see beyond it. One can both acknowledge, identify with, and yet somehow be more than that with which one contends. Expediency is the catchword of our time. and it is not a route to the inscrutable. It is a route to the definable, the consolable, the delimiting. One cannot partake of the fruits of vibrancy, of the profound and emancipating through gimmickry. There are no tricks to cultivating awe. The danger today is that we delude ourselves into believing such tricks, that we mistake Isaiah Berlin's jigsaw puzzle universe, for the brute and throbbing one which is present to us. As suggested previously, almost every cutting-edge technology poses this danger. Virtually every designer drug, genetic manipulation, and robotic innovation holds the potential for abominable self-delusion. While we can be aided and indeed miraculously transformed by these developments, which I will not deny, we must not lose touch with their partiality and their envelopment within the inscrutable. Ethically, one of the greatest dangers of the new technology is jadedness. The more we become jaded, the less we acknowledge mystery. The less we acknowledge mystery, the more we lose touch with its current. The current of mystery, of the inscrutable, is amazement. I don't care what one wants to label this amazement. God, love, Brahman, Nirvana, Prana, Buddha, Jesus, McDonald's? No, I don't think so. Or even randomization, process, or energy. The point is that whatever one calls it, it's simply too incredible to sweep aside, to downplay, or to tout as non-divine. And this divinity has enormous implications, even as an inscrutable divinity, perhaps especially as an inscrutable divinity. So let's look at some of these implications here. One doesn't need a directive and a definable God to feel the presence of divinity. If we begin with the inscrutable, we begin with a sense of something incomprehensible at work. We begin with awe. Awe infuses everything that we do, feel, and think, and it affects all our relations with the world. If creation is amazing and incomprehensible, then everything that partakes in creation must be seen as equally amazing and incomprehensible. And this is a key ethical pillar of this notion of faith in the inscrutable. It follows then that everything must be treated to the extent possible as amazing and incomprehensible. Just where does this axiom lead? It leads to the foundational religious concepts of respecting the stranger, caring about the neighbor, and so on. But it goes beyond these reflexive obedience to commands. It embraces the obedience which cannot in the end be declined, the command which cannot in total be shunned, the command of creation itself. This is the command of the inscrutable, the majestic beyond, which at one point or another we all must heed. But the key here is that the respect commanded by the inscrutable is not at all of the neatly codified variety, such as that found in traditional religious tracts. It's of a wholly different nature. In contrast to religious tracts, the inscrutable compels a mutable respect, a respect that leans on humanity. This respect, it seems to me, is the optimal arbiter for our ambiguous condition. Just as one can't apply a fits-all product to a diverse and opinionated populace, one can't force a fits-all ethic to a complex and changing existence. The ethics of ambiguity, as Sartre and de Beauvoir have termed it, is not at all whimsical or arbitrary. It's not anything goes behavior, but it is an ethic that calls upon the deepest energies of democracy, the fullest engagements of dialogue, and the keenest perceptions of context. The kind of ethics I refer to here, moreover, are not simply situational ethics, as that approach is conventionally defined. By contrast, the ethics I propose is an awe-based situational ethic. It is an ethic infused by the thrill and anxiety of living, and the reverence, humility, and wonder of living. While other situational ethics tend to resort to intellectual or consensus-based criteria, an awe-based ethics is ever attuned to the whole, the embodied, and the relational in its deliberations. And here I refer to Carol Gilligan's fine work in critiquing Kohlberg's reliance on these sort of intellectual principles for moral guidance versus the embodied situation, how the human being resonates in a bodily way with the context that surrounds them. In short, an awe-based ethics is attuned to the many levels of our relationship to the problem in question, to the inscrutable as a whole, which of necessity incorporates heart, head, and mind. This holistic view is precisely what contemporary forms of pluralistic decision-making lack, and therefore suffer from in their rivalries with other ethical forms. And I am talking about what I think much of what we see in the halls of government, even here, even though I do believe there's a lot of greatness to that form of dialogue. I don't think it goes far enough in tapping this sense of awe about life. And as a result, it suffers in terms of how the world views many of the ways that we carry on our ethical dialogues. But the problem is that many of the other ethical forms, fundamentalism, sectarianism of all kind, despite any counterbalance they may offer, fall woefully short of the holism themselves. You just consider the Taliban of Afghanistan, who rave against godless capitalism and the halls of democracy for their empty words, but treat women as inferiors, forbid secular education, and ban the expression of emotion. Is that a kind of religiosity that we can connect with? Yet, by beginning with awe in the inscrutable, there is no instant path. The path, in fact, becomes an article of faith, a hard-won leap. At some point, one has to leap. The question is, from whom or what does that leap emerge? A religious decree? A parental command? A government law? Or is there a more personal derivation to the leap? Through struggle, intentional living, and openness, one can find an awe-based faith. But this faith is very different than the reflexive faith of disciples, or the expedient faith of marketers, or the obsessive faith of fanatics, or even George Bush's faith-based education. This is a faith, on the other hand, wrought from the encounter with these other faiths. It is a faith wrought from the encounter with the myopic, the fleeting, and the one-dimensional. It's a faith wrought from pain, but it's not confined by pain. It's a faith born of deep self-inquiry, deep presence to the results of that inquiry, and a deep trust in the unfolding of the results. A notion that Paul Tillich calls listening love, which I'll elaborate momentarily. It is a faith born of confidence that one can survive one's intense grappling. But it is not just a faith in survival. It is a faith in that which permits survival to occur. Awe-based faith entails a giving up when there's nothing left, as Becker put it. A placing of one's trust in the tremendous creative energies of the cosmos to work through and with us when we are spent. The key here, however, is when we are spent. Too many circumvent this arduous faith and seek the easy, though life-draining course. So what are the present challenges of faith, and what is our present task? How is it that we can preserve our centers and sustain a faith in the inscrutable at the same time? Before I respond to this, let me review what such a faith implies. Faith in the inscrutable comprises three intertwining perspectives. The magnificence of creation, the mystery or obscurity of creation, and our responsibility or ability to respond to that mystery and that magnificence. I'd like you to think about the inscrutable, almost like those Gestalt illusions, where if you look at it from one angle, you see one shape, you look at it from another, you see another. How mystery and magnificence intensively play off one another if one is holding that awe-based worldview. Let's begin with magnificence. The inscrutable implies magnificence as well as mystery. One of life's primary allures is the magnificence of creation. While there are other allures such as bodily delights, pleasures of mind, the magnificence of creation is at their fount. That creation exists at all is magnificent, and no dimension, neither small nor great, the bereft nor the luxuriant, the obscure nor the indubitable are exempt. The span of humanity's hope is precisely the reach of magnificence within the inscrutable. While hope can be experienced in the absence of such vastness, as tough-minded materialists are wont to persuade us, I question that hope's resiliency, intensity, and durability. Hope based on some kind of cognitive program or intellectual plan. Not the same. I also question its validity. What does it take to perceive creation's magnitude? A breath? Mystery. Mystery is the flip side of magnificence. Being is mystery, and so is non-being. They are great, but they are fathomless. Mystery implies anxiety, but it also implies poignancy, depth, and possibility. Faith in the inscrutable invokes both magnificence and mystery, hope and uncertainty. Walt Whitman is great on this, where he talks about great is goodness. I do not know what it is any more than I know what health is, but I know it is great. But he also says great is wickedness. I find I often admire it just as much as I admire goodness. Do you call that a paradox? It certainly is a paradox. You've got to get the angle that he's looking at this problem from. The notion that everything about being is great at some level, about life at some level. But the question, of course, is how do we deal with that, with those amazements or those incomprehensibles? So as Whitman implies, we cannot have magnificence without uncertainty. See, I think this is where some of the transpersonal folks are barking up the wrong tree, in a sense. Cannot have magnificence without uncertainty, without continual unfoldment, continual sense of discovery and inquiry, it seems to me. A kind of never-ending context. We can't have the kind of full magnificence that many of the existential theological folks point to. And we cannot have mystery without hope. So within the mysterious, within the uncertain, ever provides possibility and hope. This paradox is sometimes overlooked in mystical transpersonal circles. As Tillich writes, here the limit of mysticism becomes visible. It neglects the human predicament and the separation of the human being from the ultimate. There is no faith without separation. But with separation comes unsettlement, and faith must live with unsettlement. Unsettlement reminds us of our fragility, but it also reminds us of our possibility. Without separation, we are complete, inert. With separation, we are in search. Without separation, we are at every moment who we are, consummated. With separation, we are every moment who we are not, evolving. And linked with mystery is responsibility, the challenge to respond. It is precisely out of uncertainty that we are called to responsibility. Whereas conventional faith downplays the role of uncertainty, faith in the inscrutable faces it head on. Because where else do you turn to within that inscrutable? But what does it mean to face uncertainty head on? As John had mentioned earlier in the week, yes, seek the truth, but it may scare the hell out of you first. Because it means that individuals, as opposed to outside authorities, must bear the brunt of decision-making. It also means that there is a dimension beyond which individuals are able to make decisions. We need to acknowledge that as well. Let us look more closely at that. The burden of individual responsibility, the ability to respond, is echoed directly by creation's impenetrability. Within this impenetrability, there is no marked path, no highway to heaven, no inviolable canon. By contrast, it is we who must struggle with that inviolability. We who must sanctify the scripts. As Becker has talked about it, there's quite a gap between reflexive and reflective religiosity. Reflexive approaches characterized by doctrinal religious practices readily subordinate the self, passively defer to authority, and seamlessly meld with others. Reflective religiosity, on the other hand, attempts at least to engage with self, grapple with authority, and exchange with others. And whereas both forms of faith submit to higher powers, the question is how and with what degree of discernment. That is the main question here. How stodgy is your surrender? And this notion is very close to Tillich's listening love, which also parallels the grappling process of depth psychotherapy. This is what has struck me more and more as I've delved into Tillich's work. That is a lot of what we're doing in depth therapy. Because for Tillich, listening love is a whole-bodied immersion in the problem or dilemma before the person or people involved. It's a whole-bodied immersion in all the sides of a given dilemma to the degree possible. So it's not just an intellectual discourse about the problem. And it's not just a programmatic type of solution regarding the problem. It is a pauseful and immersive kind of experience and discernment. And out of that, hopefully, a substantive decision can arise. That's the base of this ethics. But one must be aware that as substantive as that decision is, because it has considered the bodily as well as the intellectual, it's still a risk in the face of the unknown. But Tillich says, the more seriously one has considered all the factors in a moral decision, the absolute as well as the relative, the traditional as well as the present and future possibilities, the more one can be certain that there is a power of acceptance in the depth of life. And I would add to that, in the depth of our own lives and in our own sinews. I don't think we take nearly the time that would be required to make those kinds of ethical decisions, to create conditions whereby those kind of ethical decisions can emerge. And most of you realize, depth therapy is becoming more and more a dinosaur in our instant result, speed-oriented world. So of course, one of the central things you need here is time, much more time, for us to make ethical decisions and to be with one another. So I envision a spiritual philosophy. I envision a time when the spiritual philosophy of faith in the inscrutable, that which I call enchanted agnosticism, becomes the norm. I hope you'll beg my indulgence here. I'm going to wax a little fancifully about this, just to throw some ideas out. By enchanted agnosticism, I mean bedazzled uncertainty, appreciative discernment, and enraptured curiosity. I mean the openness and skepticism of science, wedded to the zeal and exaltation of religion. And I mean the veneration of mystery, wedded to the solemnity of responsibility. Further, I mean a radically new view of God, being, or creation. A view that trumps nihilism as it does dogma, purposelessness as it does certitude. A view that basks not in particular things, but in the amazement, astonishment, and bewilderment of things. It does not matter what you call this existence, God or spirit or nature. What does matter is that it is incredible, however conceived. More formally, I define enchanted agnosticism in terms of the following suppositions: that the source of the universe, for example, God, quanta, is unknown. That this unknown is amazing and awe-inspiring, as well as daunting and overpowering. And that people need to respond to, that is, take responsibility for, rather than react against this paradoxical condition. We need to grapple with it, rather than simply knee-jerk react to this condition. Because otherwise, then we split, we become polarized. To avoid the paradoxes of being both overwhelmed, overpowered, and uplifted and exhilarated. And believe me, we form defenses in both directions as human beings, it seems to me, unfortunately. So I want to mention as an aside here, I've been reading Karen Armstrong's wonderful History of God. And I was very heartened to see that she is reverberating to the kind of thinking that I've been doing with this notion of enchanted agnosticism. Because her conclusion at the end of that work, after studying these major Western religions, is that we probably could use a good dose of what she calls mystical agnosticism today. That is a relevant and ripe perspective for our contemporary world. But the problem is, how do we reach people with that mystical agnosticism? It has to reach people, because it doesn't have that charismatic, sort of charged sensibility that some of the more traditional and fundamentalist religions have, that do reach people. The thing is, it should have a lot of that. Somehow we're not bringing it out quite right. So briefly, I envision a time when enchanted agnosticism is echoed in the schools and temples, in the boardrooms and embassies, and in the bedrooms and in the alleyways, in every human sphere. This would be a time when churches throw open their doors to mosques and mosques to synagogues, when Buddhist priests can perform sacred chanting rites before Hindu congregants, when Jewish temples sanction Protestant services. It would be a time perhaps when every major denomination will regularly and on a rotating basis host every other major denomination, and yet maintain their respective identities. so that they can deepen within their own perspective as well. I envision a time when enchanted agnosticism, awe-based living, is practiced in business and diplomatic circles, when politicians and mediators and entrepreneurs model the actions they expect of others. I think Lois Holtzman's work at the Eastside Institute seems to be working in this way, where the leaders are part of the group and get down with the people they're working with in an embodied way and encourage that among others. So when politicians and mediators and entrepreneurs model the actions they expect of others, when they partake in interfaith ceremonies, avail themselves to intimate interchanges, and open to diverse folk traditions. And then and only then will the spirals of hate, of tit for tat, and of intercultural estrangement be stanched. Then and only then will substantive peace have a chance, it seems to me. Religious and scientific types, moreover, hopefully will begin to perceive not only their respective divergences, but also their respective convergences, usefulnesses, and virtues. Excuse me. While adherents of doctrinal faith will reassess the value of openness and skepticism due to mystery and holding mystery, devotees of calculation will reevaluate the legitimacy of veneration and faith. And as you probably are surmising, we are seeing some of these trends. And while spiritualists will rethink material realities, materialists will revisit the ethereal, poetic, and felt, which is happening to some degree with qualitative research, for example. I envision a time when diplomatic and trade meetings are attended not only by policymakers, but also by ethical philosophers, spiritual leaders, and organizational psychologists. When, for example, attendees participate in professionally facilitated process groups, something like Gestalt groups, perhaps, and promote frank exchanges of feeling, and when the input from scientists and philosophers matches that from legislators and generals. I envision a time when representatives can broach each other's personal fears, as well as state or corporate agendas, when international relations can be spoken about in terms of you and me, interpersonal relations among those at these meetings, and when hopes and trepidations are coupled with predictions and averages. Now, if this sounds out of reach and kind of pie in the sky, I grant that yes, it is in part, but there are people like Carl Rogers who have been carrying on these kinds of interchanges with people, and I mentioned Lois's work before, and have gotten very positive feedback. But for some reason, these notions are not getting picked up, obviously, in the mainstream. We can speculate about that. So one of the attendees at a Carl Rogers conference regarding Nicaragua, the U.S. relations with Nicaragua, said to Rogers in a letter, "Thank you for this very important experience. I think the result of these 4 days was amazing, changing hostility to trust. I do wish your method will be used by many in peace efforts. For me personally, your way of meeting me, I think, will change my life." So it wasn't just about philosophical, political discussion. It was about personal change as well. So at the same time, however, we must be circumspect about these developments, particularly in the wake of September 11th. Enchantment cannot flower without security. Openness cannot flourish without stability. Just as in one-on-one relationships, as we know from depth therapy, safeguards are essential, and particularly in environments that promote this sensitivity to awe and the wonder of living. While many of these safeguards, I think, will arise naturally in a culture that is more embracing of the inscrutable, others will still have to be enforced. I think we have to be frank about that. Much more minimally, hopefully, than is the case today. So as more partake in the great conversation, fewer will pine for the great detonation or the holy vindication. And as some invite deepening, widening, others will permit risking, opening. In short, enchanted agnosticism, the embrace of mystery, has tremendous potential to change our lives, to address the confusion and spiritual hunger of our contemporary lives. It holds humility and discernment at the same time as it accents risk-taking and exhilaration. And it provides an ethical consideration, embodied reflection, or listening love, that takes both of these polarities into account. The question is, can we reach people with enchanted agnosticism? This is Karen Armstrong's second criterion for a viable religion. The first is, does it work? I think we've shown, I hope I've shown, that this perspective can operate, at least at this somewhat speculative level. But I think there's enough evidence to indicate it can operate. The second criterion is the huge one. Can we reach people with enchanted agnosticism? So I think I'll end with that and end with the question of whether I've reached you with enchanted agnosticism. And we can ponder whether we can reach others.
We have at least 15 more minutes or so lunch will be available for those who come to the late. I can told that by the
Oh, thank you. So, thank you. Yeah, Brent.
I'm ready to check into your building, so I'll put a reservation in.
Okay.
I have a question for you. I've been working on phenomenological research on joy, and one of the things that I've seen in my protocols is that almost consistently, if I access it, what was the feeling they had right before they entered into joy was awe. And it was sort of this cracking open and into this recognition of something larger than themselves.
Huh.
The experience of joy and the feeling of fulfillment in that. And I wanted to share that with you and just get some of your thoughts about how that fits in with what you mentioned, what you discussed today.
Well, I'm excited to hear about that research. I think we need more of this kind of research. What do they mean by awe, just briefly? A sense of the thrill and anxiety of living?
Yeah, awe is this sort of orientation that's opening up to something bigger than themselves, something greater than themselves.
The vastness. Sense of the benevolence of it. Yeah, that's interesting because I have a little different take on awe, that it's mixed with some dread, mixed with some unsettlement. But
you can go either way.
yeah,
That one can experience anxiety in that moment as well.
Yes.
And that's something that I've been playing with myself. In Heidegger's Being in Time, he does an analysis of anxiety in part 2, where he talks about anxiety as an authentic mood. And there's this point where he just mentioned it, just one line where he talks about unshakable joy as being sort of related to authentic anxiety. And that's really, I think there's this very close connection between sort of authentic joy and anxiety as authentic within the thing.
So some of that anxiety is coming through even in your subjects?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, also I'm struck with the fact that you're studying this one dimension of joy versus maybe a more broad-based or diversified dimension, like tragic optimism, which, for example, a student of mine at the Center for Humanistic Studies did research on recently too. So this is great. I'd like to see your work as well, where he studied people who have somehow come to terms with some of the deep tragedies and losses in their lives and come into this worldview of tragic optimism, of holding both the overwhelmingness of those events and the unsettlement of them and the opening that those events have brought to their lives, the intensification of their sense of life brought on by those events.
Yeah, well, I'm really interested in checking out that piece of optimism. It seems like there's a close connection.
I think there's a close connection. There's also Rollo May's beautiful little quote about joy, where he contrasts joy with happiness, that happiness is basically satiation or contentment, but joy is the something about the clashing of, or the embracing of disharmony in the service of a higher harmony, something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Not lost. Sure, no, take your time. Yes, this.
And I think the phrase reach, how do we reach people with this is what maybe I just need to contribute to the answer to that in suggesting that reach.
Well, the way we carry it on, at least in this country, our tradition of democracy and democratic discussion tends to be more heady, I find, more intellectualizing rather than whole-bodied. Like people looking at the feelings that come up around issues as well as just the intellectual aspects of the issues.
So, I think my question has something to do with, so what you're calling the embrace of history, I guess, maybe it's the same thing that I call the end of knowing. And that,
Similar.
that we need to go about our lives and understand in a non-epistemological way. And so I mean, to the extent that we've had any success in our work, it hasn't had to do with reaching people, which sounds to me like you're giving them here it is, do you want to accept it, as opposed to inviting people to participate in the making of something new and mysterious and unknown.
More of
So
it.
just putting that out,
Yeah,
that's
I appreciate
consistent
that.
with what you mean.
It is. I mean basically connecting with people more about the riches of this kind of perspective. I don't think the riches of this kind of tragic optimistic perspective, if you will, have been exhibited or clarified or made it available enough to people. So, yeah, I'm very much with you about the idea of inviting people into forums where this kind of sensibility can grow.
I guess I'm talking more than a sensibility, but the actual making of the richness. In other words,
The living
it
it.
sounds like an idea to me.
Ah, okay.
I
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay, I hear what you're saying, and I realize in this forum and maybe that also connects more with my own style of talking about something that I feel deeply is, is here, and that I feel I'm living it in my own way. It may be a quieter way. It may not be, it doesn't have to be in a theatrical setting, for example, at all. I mean, I think Kierkegaard, in all his loneliness and his even isolation, had some of this sensibility, and maybe Nietzsche did as well. I'm not advocating those as great models for social connection, but there are different ways to experience the sensibility, to experience the intensity of this.
That somehow that experience comes there. So I think your comment struck me as
But also when you say, what you seem to be saying is when you stop fighting, somehow you're more open to the weight of that overwhelmingness, but through your surrender, also open to the astonishment of that overwhelmingness. You see something great about it as witnesses. Right. You get that overview, as Spinoza talked about, sub specie aeterni, under the aspect of eternity. It's connecting with that overview that I think really brings us into this state. I don't personally know. I'm out of favor with that.
The reason I'm asking is, you're asking how do you get there?
Oh, right.
And one of the comments you made earlier, we do have to be careful about technology. Fire kills, but it also allows us to.
Yeah, right.
The internet and web, Facebook, it is a way to reach people anywhere on the planet. And I think it's really interesting. I think maybe what you're talking about is actually already occurring. Just recently, I've been having this, I used to believe in God, now I'm not sure, but I know that existence is just so magnificent, it can't be accidental. Even if it did, it's so magnificent.
Right.
So I'm struggling.
That point, exactly.
I've been very fortunate, and it really struck me when you talked about different phases going on the rotating basis. I was recently invited by a Jesuit priest in Seattle to partake of the Ignatian spiritual exercises, knowing full well that I knew they were Christian, but there's something out there. It's an amazing opportunity for me, and to just think about things that we ordinarily don't think about, and talk to people from other traditions. So maybe if you could find someone who could build you a website, stumble across these things.
It's a good way to use technology to deeper purposes, if you will. Yeah. I have somewhat of a website through the Existential Humanistic Institute, but it's a little different. It's a training program. Yeah. Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments? Well, I thank you very much for being a part of this revival.